Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced. The best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hello, everybody out there. Jason Barger here, and I'm releasing this special podcast in the midst of the outrage across our country in this past week in response to the brutal death of George Floyd, and unfortunately too many names in the past before him. Like many of you out there, I'm feeling sickness in my stomach. I've been feeling just sick to my stomach. I've been feeling anger. I've been feeling outrage, sadness. But I've also been having a rush of passion for love and for justice. It's such a strange time in our country and in the world right now, in a time where we are being asked to socially distance. Humanity, yes, needs our physical distancing, but humanity certainly does not need our emotional distancing. In fact, what it needs is our unity. So this is a time to not be silent. You've been hearing people say that more and more, that this is not a time to be silent, but to share our voice. So I'm going to do my best on this quick podcast to share my voice on this day, my quick thoughts that are hopefully helpful to you. It's not meant to just be another voice and more noise in the world, but it is supposed to be a helpful voice. I don't have all the answers. I know that nobody does. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But this isn't a time to be silent. It is a time to share our voice. It's a time to stand, to listen, and to lead. And so I want to start off by just saying a couple of things, that I stand against racism. I stand right now in my mind and my heart with those who are suffering, those who are hurting, those who are experiencing injustice, which, as all of us watch the things that we've seen on the news, all of us hopefully are experiencing that feeling of injustice. And I stand against racism. I stand with good police officers, good protectors of peace and first responders who want the best for others in our world. I stand with those people, and I know they exist out there. I stand with people for unity, for justice, and love. So let me just share a couple of quick thoughts about my experience. This past Saturday morning, just a couple of days ago, my wife Amy and I woke up and felt a yearning with everything that was happening in the world, a yearning that we couldn't just sit still. And so we loaded our family up in our car, my kids of ages 15, 13, and 10, and we headed downtown. It was a time and an opportunity to talk with our kids and to figure out what is it that they're seeing from their perspective. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? We wanted to talk with them and listen and try to understand, who is George Floyd to them? What do they think is happening in the world? Why are people so angry? And most importantly, we wanted them to know and see how their parents think about it. And so we had this great opportunity in the car ride downtown where we started to be able to talk with them and listen, and for them to hear. They needed to know that the actions that they were seeing on the news from the police officers and from the George Floyd experience and from everything that they were seeing, they needed to know the actions were not okay. And they also needed to know that we must give our support to justice. and that it was important for our family to stand against racism. And it was our opportunity and duty to stand with good people and to stand up for good police officers. We needed them to get downtown just so they could see what was happening. And so as we parked our car and we made ourselves into the crowd, our face masks on, face coverings on for protecting ourselves against COVID-19 in this strange time in our world, we walked up to the corner. We walked up to the street side, right at the corner of Broad and High, downtown in Columbus, Ohio, across from the State House. And there were chants filling the streets. Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Filled the air, echoed. There was passion. There was anger. And there certainly was a desire for justice. We stood there together. We watched. We wanted them to see and to be a part of this and to know that their presence matters. And as police began to set a barricade with their bikes in front of the crowd that was mostly peaceful, there, of course, pushing began, water bottles began to be thrown, and then we saw that the tear gas was going to be coming out. And as I looked at my young daughter, whose tears were beginning to run down her face, and she was looking at us and asking, why is this even happening? It was time for us to get out of the area and to talk more about what we were experiencing. This podcast, my books, my speeches, the consulting that I do with companies and teams and organizations focuses on leadership and culture. And if you listen back, if you read anything that I've ever written, if you listen to past podcasts, if you've been a part of speeches or you've been part of a company where I've consulted with your team or your organization around leadership and culture, then you know that so many of the themes that we've discussed in the past are needed now more than ever. I think about this term leadership. And hopefully in the last couple of days, you've seen when I think about that term leadership and you think about the different ways that either leadership is showing up in the midst of these tough times or is totally absent. And we're looking around and wondering who is leading. Hopefully you've seen the great example. An example like Chief Swanson from Flint, Michigan. If you saw that video, if you didn't see it, please go. I know I posted it on Twitter and on Facebook and some of my other social media platforms, so I hope you'll check it out. If you didn't see this video, then you need to see it. But the sheriff in Chief Swanson in Flint, Michigan, as the protests were beginning and the crowd was gathering and people were angry and yelling and chanting and passionate, that he stepped forward and he took off his mask and he put down his baton and he said, loudly for the crowd to hear, that police officer that you saw in the video with George Floyd does not represent us. We're as sick as you are. And he went on to say that he's putting down his gear. He's putting down his helmet. He's putting down his baton. And then he wants this to become a parade, not a protest. And as he made this plea and stood in front with leadership in front of that hostile crowd, all of a sudden chants of "walk with us, walk with us, walk with us" began to be chanted through the air. It was a moment of leadership. He put down his gear. He listened. And then he said to the crowd in response to the "walk with us," he said, "Let's walk. And let's walk with each other." In a world where systematic racism and systematic leadership problems exist, Obviously, in this example where an officer had 18 prior complaints against him, and yet then this still happens to George Floyd. Change is needed, and servant leadership is needed. Leadership that steps forward in the midst of that, but looks to not to be combative, but to build relationship, trust, listening, and walking with each other. You've heard me talk about, and you know the way that I talk about the power of language, and that I often say that language helps drive behavior. Language drives behavior in leadership and in culture shaping in the world. So in the last few days, I've leaned back on language that I've needed to hear again, language that I've needed to rehear. Words like Martin Luther King Jr.'s words from his 1964 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, where he said,
"I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of nuclear annihilation. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant."
I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. I needed to hear those words again. I think we all need to hear those words again. I needed to hear the first words from the poet Gregory Orr in his poem, "Let's Remake the World with Words." I needed to hear those first words, the very first words of that poem, "Let's Remake the World with Words" by Gregory Orr, where he says, let's remake the world with words, not frivolously, nor to hide from what we fear, but with purpose. Let's remake the world with words, not frivolously, nor to hide from what we fear, but with purpose. If language drives behavior, then what are those words we need to share, those words we needed to hear? I needed to hear those words again, and to encourage me to think about the words that I'm using. I think I needed to hear those words again, and I'm guessing that you did too. And if you're a person of faith, no matter what your tradition, or even if you have no tradition, or if you're not a person of faith, because this is about going across all boundaries and all meaning all. But still, no matter if you're a person of faith or different faith traditions, my guess is that the words from the book of James in the Bible, where it says faith without deeds is dead, no matter what your background may be, that phrase may seem to make more sense now more than ever. Faith without deeds is dead. Whatever our faith is, whatever our beliefs are, whatever our core values or ideology is, It needs to have action, deeds that follow. I needed to rehear those words again. And I'm sure that maybe we all need to hear those words again. I talk about culture. And certainly when I talk about culture or I write about culture and I speak with teams and organizations or consult with teams and organizations about proactively shaping the culture on their team and within their organizations and about the culture that they want to create for tomorrow and how do we proactively shape it, I remind them that we all share in the creation of the cultures we experience. How we think, act, and interact each moment co-creates the ecosystem that we're a part of, that all of us share in the creation of that culture that we experience by the way that we think, act, and interact daily together. Our thinking, our language, our mindset, our habits impact our actions and our interactions with others. We are thermostats. All of us on the planet are thermostats who set a temperature for the others around us. And so what is the temperature that has been needed for generations, that is needed right now? What is the temperature, no matter what the color of your skin is right now, what is the temperature that's needed to be set with the people around you and the temperature that hopefully will reach to the others and connect us all? I believe, again, I'm just one person and one perspective, one voice. But as I keep hearing, we're all being told right now that now is not a time to be silent. I believe the temperature needed right now is of listening, is of caring, is of stepping toward one another rather than away from one another. It's not a temperature about destruction, but it is about construction. What are we going to construct and build and change together? And as you hear me say in my books, in my speeches, and in the work that I do with teams and organizations, where I say that conversations are the currency for change. Conversations are the currency for change, and I fully understand and recognize that the reason why some of the destruction, some of the anger, some of the actions have gotten that way over the last week are because they're not being heard. Their voice isn't being heard. Our conversations aren't happening, but we need to get to a place where conversations can truly be the currency for change. And from those conversations, from that language, from that connection and unity, then action is needed and must follow. We've had enough. There have been too many examples in the past. It's time for leadership, and it's time for all of us, no matter who you are, where you are, what color you are, it's time for all of us to at least stand in support of progress. In the midst of all that is swirling in the world right now, I hope this, even these just few minutes, I hope this has been a moment for you to step back, to breathe, to listen, to think, to recalibrate your thermostat. I hope we all can set a temperature of love. I hope we can set a temperature where we are voices of support for justice, that we are intolerant for injustice, and set a temperature and an encouragement to those that are doing good in the world, those that are truly standing up, protecting, doing good work in the world, a temperature of action, of unity. I stand with Martin Luther King Jr.'s words and spirit and his reminder to us all when he said, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word." Unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using. And share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to your organization, or you have a question or comment about this podcast, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we all are ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.